and welcome to Meet the Candidate. We have the pleasure here at Awesome Radio having Mr. Darren Jackson. He's a candidate for the Democratic Party for the NC Court of Appeals, seat 11. My name is Renee Borston Hill, and we'll be conducting a friendly interview with Mr. Jackson. So, how are you doing today, Mr. Jackson?
I'm doing great. I hope you are.
Yes, I'm doing fine. It's a beautiful sunny afternoon, so
Yes.
that's all good. So, um, one of the things, okay, that we want to make sure that our listening audience understands is what is a court of appeals, or how do you get to a court of appeals? And before we start that, I'm sorry, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my name is Darren Jackson. I am a judge on the Court of Appeals up for election in November for an 8-year term. Born and raised in Knightdale, Eastern Wake County, so Knightdale, not too far from Greenville. Went to public schools in the area, then to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill for undergraduate. Got my law degree from Duke University School of Law, and then returned back to Zebulon, where I practiced for 25 years before being appointed as a judge on the Court of Appeals in December of 2020.
Okay. So, now how does a person get to the Court of Appeals? Just tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so the Court of Appeals is our intermediate trial appellate court. And so it just depends on the kind of matter you are. But most things from our trial court level, whether it's district court or superior court, if you are unsatisfied with the outcome, or either party can give notice of appeal, and that comes directly to the Court of Appeals. Um, the Court of Appeals is what's known as an error correcting court. So we don't rehear the evidence. It's not a new trial, so to speak. It's looking at the case to see if any legal errors were made. And if they were made, then the case is sent back down to the trial courts for a retrial. So we don't actually hear from witnesses, take testimony, or anything like that. We're reviewing the record on appeal, what happened down below, transcripts, looking at evidence, and then the briefs of the parties. But we don't retry the case or rehear the case. If you are successful in your appeal, then you'll get a new hearing in either district or superior court, wherever you came from.
Okay. So what are the qualifications to be a judge in the Court of Appeals?
So constitutionally, it's just to be a lawyer, to be a judge. You can, we have younger judges, we have older judges, we have judges with a lot of trial court experience who are prosecutors, or we judges who are defense attorneys, judges who have taught law in law schools, who've been involved in civil practices. I don't think there's not any one particular qualification, although I certainly think that having experience trying cases, handling matters of all kinds in courts all across the state, I think is a big benefit to a judge, because one of the things you're trying to do as a judge on the Court of Appeals is to make sure that justice is dispensed uniformly, so that a case in Cherokee County is handled the same way that a case from Dare County would be handled. And so I think it helps if you've practiced law for a while, although there is no minimum qualification
All right.
other than being a lawyer.
Okay. Now you did mention that you're going into an elected position. You're seeking an elected position, but you said you were appointed initially. So for the Court of Appeals, you could be appointed versus also being elected into the position.
Right. So whenever there's an opening on the court, unexpected, not as a result of an election, then the governor gets to fill that spot. And so I was appointed by Governor Cooper, a judge in the last election who was currently serving on the Court of Appeals, won a seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court. And so that made a vacancy. And so I was appointed, but when you're appointed, you have to run in the next election. And so I'm running for election this year. So you can be appointed, but you eventually will have to run for election whenever the next even number year election is. So some people have to run immediately, but the way mine was, I got the appointment, right when the other judge left, about 2 years. So I'll have about 2 years come election day.
Okay. So everything has become politicized. What role does party play when you're making your decisions or you're doing your work in the Court of Appeals?
Well, I hope it doesn't make any part on, whether it's on my behalf or any of my fellow judges. It shouldn't. Politics doesn't really have a part to play. Although, politics plays a lot of role in who gets elected. And so the General Assembly, in their wisdom, decided some years ago to make the judges run as partisan judges. I think that was in 2015. And so ever since then, we've had to run as a partisan candidate. But I like to think that people put that partisan label to the side when they hear cases. In the Court of Appeals, we don't generally hear a lot of politically charged cases. Those cases are often heard in direct appeals to the Supreme Court, or either they'll skip the Court of Appeals and go directly to the Supreme Court. And so a lot of the cases, most of the cases we hear are not what I would consider partisan cases at all. But even if they were, I would say politics plays no role. I think, if I had my way about it, we would run as nonpartisan. But that's, the rules require us. Well, you have a choice. You can run as a Democrat or Republican, or you can gather 80, 100,000 signatures to get on the ballot. So it's a pretty high barrier to run statewide if you're not a member of one of the major parties.
Okay. Well, how do you know a court is running well?
Well, certainly we have guidelines that we follow, and one of those is that we try to get most cases out from about 90 days from when they're heard, get an opinion issued. And there are certain particular cases that deal with abuse, neglect, or dependency of children that involve minors, that we have a faster timeline of try to get those cases heard and out within 30 days. And so one way you can tell if the court is being efficient is if it's meeting these internal deadlines that have been set. That's certain cases certainly take longer than others and are more complicated. And oftentimes, if judges don't agree, then they have to draft what's called a dissenting opinion or a different concurring opinion. And sometimes that takes a little longer. But I think one of the things, the way to tell is how efficient the court is how far behind it is. Now, the Court of Appeals is not behind at this point. A lot of that has to do with COVID. And during the COVID shutdown of our court system, although the Court of Appeals continued to operate and went online, a lot of our trial courts were not holding jury trials and things of that nature. And so those are the things that would eventually be appealed to the Court of Appeals. And so we're in a position now where we're not behind at all and running very efficiently. But we do expect a wave of these COVID cases now that they're working their way through the trial court for them to come to the Court of Appeals and bring back. We also, several years ago, had a type of case that was skipping the Court of Appeals and going directly to the court of the Supreme Court. Termination of parental rights, they call them TPR cases. Those cases since July are now coming back to the Court of Appeals. And so we're going to be adding those to our normal caseload. And those are the type of cases, again, that we try to get out within 30 days.
Election day is November 8th.
All right, but
Early voting begins
we're
October
taking our first
20th.
break.
Do you know the
We have two
candidates
more
who are
breaks coming up. The
campaigning
next
for
will be
our
20
vote?
minutes.
Awesome Radio is hosting
And
a
then it will be
nonpartisan
another,
candidate forum October
break
11th,
for the
Tuesday,
last
from
10
6
minutes.
p.m. to 9 p.m. at Pitt Community College, the Goes Student Center. All candidates have been invited. This candidate forum is free and open to the public. This forum is designed for voter education and for us to get to know the candidates up close and personal before we cast our vote. That's Tuesday, October 11th, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at Pitt Community College. If you have questions for the candidates, email them to us, wbisawesomeradio.org, or inbox on social media. Visit our website for more information. To volunteer for this event, contact us 252-756-3137. This is another Awesome Radio community event.
Welcome back to Meet the Candidate. I have the pleasure here today to be interviewing Mr. Darren Jackson. Right before the break, we were speaking about the court system, and we do know that how do you know a court is running well? And we do know that there'll be a great expectation now that the court is resumed with the COVID impact. Is there any comment that you would like to continue with in terms of how COVID has impacted the Court of Appeals?
Yeah, I mean, again, it had a dramatic impact on our court system. And so that necessitated, we now have a backlog in our trial courts across the state, and that has to work through, and that's being worked through by our trial courts. I'm sure they're trying cases in every county across the state every week now, trying to catch up on that backlog and not get farther behind. And then, so those cases will eventually work their way up into our appellate courts, and we'll be dealing with those. And hopefully we'll be starting from a good spot so that we don't ever get behind and can continue to be that. You know, COVID brought a lot of necessary changes to how we did things, and necessitated us going online for our oral arguments so that people could do that from the safety of their offices or their homes and didn't have to come to Raleigh and be exposed to other people and take COVID tests and things of that nature. And that's been a really positive, learning to do that the technological way, as opposed to the way we used to do it, has helped a lot. How we circulate cases and opinions among the judges, how the judges communicate with each other. But as well as going forward, now that we have returned to in-person arguments, those are still being broadcast on YouTube. And so someone who has an interest in a case, they don't have to drive to Raleigh to watch it. They don't have to even be watching it at the time the case is heard. They can go back and look it up later if they're interested in seeing. It makes the courts a lot more transparent, in my opinion, and gives people an idea if they want to learn more about what the Court of Appeals does. There's also the option for attorneys from maybe the eastern part of the state or the western part of the state who had a small matter that's important to their client, but maybe they don't have a client who can afford to pay an attorney to drive to Raleigh and pay for a hotel room overnight and spend. So the attorneys can consent to do an oral argument by the internet online. And so we're accommodating that. And so hopefully that makes it more efficient for the clients, and for the attorneys, right? Because the attorneys were having to shut down their practice for the day to drive to Raleigh to argue a case the next day. Now they can just take an hour and do their argument and then see their next client. And so hopefully we've made some improvements that will serve people well going forward. And again, I really like the transparency aspect of it, in that most people don't know what the Court of Appeals does, have never seen. I mean, we have a program where we travel to each of the state's law schools once a year and hold oral arguments. And the whole purpose was so that law students can see an actual oral argument with the Court of Appeals and see what we do. And Now the truth is they could do that from their dorm room or their apartment. They could watch it. And so, but we still are doing the traveling to the law schools because I think it's a great program. But it's just another example of how now that access, that online access, that people can now find things and watch things, see how their government operates. I think it's always a good thing.
Well, you jumped down to some of my other questions, and one was,
Oh,
what is your opinion of live streaming appellate court cases? So you covered that with us, that you're definitely pro, and that's one of the things that technology has allowed us to really just advance in so many ways, and just be able to have access to so much information that maybe we necessarily could not, based on not having access to streaming, internet, just technology in itself. So,
yeah, I think it's been great. It's been great.
Mhm.
I think I've heard people in the past, the U.S. Supreme Court has for years um, fought pushes to put cameras in the courtroom. I think some fear that judges would somehow act differently in front of the courtroom cameras, or but I haven't seen anything like that. I mean, I don't even realize the cameras are there. They're voice activated, so if I ask a question, the camera turns to me, and so you see me. Um, but again, I think it's been all positive. And then, of course, as a statewide office and campaigning statewide, a lot of groups or a lot of people who invite you to speak are still doing Zoom, or maybe they're doing a Zoom in person kind of mashup. And so it makes it a lot easier for me to attend more events when some of them are on Zoom. And so I can do an interview with you today, and still catch something else an hour later, as opposed to driving down to Greenville to do it in person. And so I think there's a lot of advantages in the technology as it moves forward, and I look forward to seeing what they come up with going
Yes.
forward.
And this is a way, that's like you're saying, we're now talking and you're going to be viewed by so many listeners all around, as many all around the state. And those, because I have a large listening audience, they're listening to you in New York, down in Virginia. So it's good. And so tell me, what experience do you bring to the appellate court that makes you the best qualified?
Yeah, so again, I don't think there's a cookie cutter approach about who makes the best judge or anything like that. But I do think the fact that I practiced law for 25 years, that I did civil litigation, jury trials, medical malpractice, insurance, car wrecks, business disputes. I did criminal law. Um, I did some serious criminal law with a partner of mine, jury trials and things of that nature. I did workers' comp in front of the Industrial Commission. I did municipal law. And then I also did appellate work. I appeared in front of the North Carolina Court of Appeals. I appeared in front of the North Carolina Supreme Court arguing cases. And so I think all of that experience it qualified me uniquely, and so to speak, because I did not get pigeonholed as just a prosecutor or just a judge. Because all those matters: municipal, administrative agency, industrial commission, criminal, civil, estates, property disputes, all of that stuff that I had experience in all gets appealed to the Court of Appeals. And
Okay.
so, I like to say I haven't done it all, but I've done a lot of it.
Okay.
And all of those cases come, and the way our cases are is, you have 12 cases, and then 2 weeks later you have 12 more, and then 2 weeks later you have 12 more, and it doesn't slow down. And so it really helps when you have experience in all those areas of law, that you don't have to learn it fresh.
Okay. Okay. So what do I need to know to cast my ballot? What do I need to know about you when I'm casting my ballot? I do know that you do have an opponent. Everybody has been reached out, and thank you again for taking the invitation. And we haven't yet heard from your opponent. But what do I need to know about you when I'm casting my ballot?
Yeah, well, you know, I think experience matters, and so we've talked a little bit about my experience, and certainly anybody listening to this can go to my website, the judge darrenjackson.com, and look up some things about me. But you can also go to the North Carolina Office of Courts, Administrative Office of Courts website, and you can look at every single opinion. You don't have to have a membership or pay money or anything like that. You can look up every single court opinion I've written while I've been here. And so you can kind of make that judgment for yourself. And I think what you'll find is um, that I'm fair and that I'm impartial. I think one of the duties of a job, the job of a judge, is not to care who wins or loses. Is you shouldn't care if the defendant was found guilty or not guilty, or if the plaintiff won or the defendant won. That's not my job to get. My job is to make sure the law was followed. And in my campaign, I have been endorsed by both the plaintiff's lawyers and the defense bar. So both sides of the coin have seen fit to endorse me. And I think that says a lot, that not that Judge Jackson favors one side or the other, but that that I'm fair and impartial. And I think that's what people want from a judge. I don't know that people necessarily want a Democratic judge or a Republican judge, um, or a judge who used to be a prosecutor or a judge who wasn't a prosecutor, but they just want somebody who's going to give them a fair shot. And I like to think that's what I do.
Okay. What is your judicial philosophy, and how will it support your mission on the appellate court?
That is a question we get asked in a lot of forums, and mine is just, again, it's very simple. I just try to be fair and impartial. Read everything that I'm presented and make a decision based on only the law and the facts of that case, and as of what the law is, not necessarily the way I want the law to be, because that's not my job. It's not my job to write the law. My job is to follow it and make sure it was followed in the cases down below. And so, I don't really have this complicated legal judicial philosophy of how you interpret certain things or anything like that. I just try to approach each case with clear eyes, impartially, and give each party a fair shot. It's
Um,
pretty simple.
Behind the scenes, okay, you're the judge and you're sitting there, but before you get to sit there and to look at, or do you go into a courtroom when as an appellate judge?
Yeah. So the way a court of appeals works is there's 15 judges. We're all elected statewide. That's why it says that I'm up for seat 11. That's just the random number that I'm assigned. But we sit in 3 judge panels. We call it a panel. So there's 3 judges on the panel. And like I said, every 2 weeks we're in a panel and we have 12 cases. The majority of those cases are just decided on the parties' briefs, their paper filings, and on the records, what happened down below. So I get the trial transcript, the trial exhibits, if there was dash cam or from a cop car or video from a convenience store, we see that's all uploaded in our system. We see all that. Only about 1 or 2 out of those 12 cases each 2 weeks has what's called an oral argument. And that's where the judges come in and we have one courtroom in the Court of Appeals, and we sit and the 3 judges, and then each party gets 30 minutes to present their side. And then after that oral argument, then the 3 judges get together and talk about all 12 cases. So, we're grouped. Those 12 cases are the same 3 judges. And whether we had an oral argument or not, we then talk about them. We decide how we're going to individually vote. and who's going to write those opinions, and then we each start about drafting those opinions on our own and sending them back and forth to the other judges for review, for comments. To maybe I'll go up and sit with another judge and talk through an issue if we're having a particular thing that I'm, because ideally you want to get to everybody being on the same page. Sometimes you can't, and if you don't, then maybe somebody writes a dissent. But generally, I don't see the litigants. I mean, they're allowed to come to the court if their case is scheduled for oral argument, but mainly we are just seeing and hearing from the attorneys. There are occasionally people who don't have an attorney, who have pro se, and we read theirs and research their cases the same way. But I don't think in the time I've been on the Court of Appeals, we've had anybody get an oral argument that actually argued their case themselves. They usually have attorneys.
Okay. Now, do you have a staff of people? Because I heard that there's pages and pages of some of these cases.
Yes. Oh gosh, thousands of pages sometimes. So much that it's really good that we have it on the online now, so that they don't have to print out quite everything. Some things are still print out, and different judges have different ways of doing it, reviewing. But we do have staff. We each have an executive assistant who could or could not be a lawyer. That's up to the individual judge. And then we have 2 lawyers who work with us in each chambers who are law clerks. And together we work together to write, the 4 opinions every 2 weeks that we are required to write, as well as research in all the other cases which we're asked to vote in. It's a lot of reading. If you don't like to read and write a lot, you see my reading glasses, keep them everywhere. You would not like to be a judge. It's not like it's not the trial court that's on TV where you have the witnesses and the cross-examination and the exciting moments. There's none of that. That's all happened already when it comes to us. You're just kind of reading page after page after page, but it's important. And the parties try to point you to the right spots, but we have to review. We need to review it all. I mean, I can't just read what the parties wrote. I need to look at the trial transcripts for myself and hear what the witnesses said, or read what the witnesses said, and what the judges did and did not do before we make that decision.
Okay. Now, you did mention that sometimes some of the clients, they might not have a lawyer. If I had a case and I wanted to appeal it, how would I go about filing it if I didn't have a lawyer?
Yeah, so we have very strict rules. So it depends on what it is. So if you're a criminal defendant, and you were found guilty and you wanted to give notice of appeal, you would be appointed a court-appointed attorney.
Okay.
And so most of the criminal defendants originally they have court-appointed attorneys. Now, after the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court has ruled on the case, sometimes some prisoners in custody don't feel like that should be the end of their case, and they write their own motions and their own new appeals or argue new issues and things like that. And so those get filed, and they're not necessarily qualified for a court-appointed attorney for those. And so sometimes they have to do those on their own. Civil cases are different. Oh, I should say abuse, neglect, dependency. If the state has gotten involved and tried to take your children from you or tried to limit your visitation with your children, you're entitled to a court-appointed attorney in that. And then the children also get what's called a guardian ad litem. And so they're represented as well in front of the court with briefs by lawyers. But civil litigants, they don't have a right to an attorney. And so most of them have to try to find an attorney to appeal. You can appeal on your own. You'll find some documents online. Actually, our rules of appellate procedure actually have forms in them where you can kind of follow along, but it's not easy, and it is. Certainly, we give people who are representing themselves the benefit of the doubt as far as how the rules are, they're not as strictly as applied as they are to lawyers, but there's a lot of rules that you have to comply with, a lot of how you file things, when you file them, the number of copies you file, serving the other side. And just one mistake can technically get your case dismissed. And so
Wow.
it's
Okay.
certainly not something I recommend. Other people certainly do it and have that right to do it. Now, sometimes if we get an issue and we think to ourselves, this is a really important issue. This is not something the court has heard before, but this one side is represented by themselves. We have a list of pro bono appellate attorneys who are willing to step in as counsel on important things. And so we can refer cases. It's very limited. But it is something that sometimes if we say, this case particularly could really use an attorney to make this argument for the party. It would be good if we could hear from both sides equally.
Mm-hmm.
And so that happens from time to time. But we always need more attorneys to volunteer to do that.
So you don't have to have a lawyer, but
Election Day is November 8th. Early voting begins October 20th. Do you know the candidates who are campaigning for our vote? Awesome Radio is hosting a nonpartisan candidate forum October 11th, Tuesday, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at Pitt Community College, the Goes Student Center. All candidates have been invited. This candidate forum is free and open to the public. This forum is designed for voter education and for us to get to know the candidates up close and personal before we cast our vote. That's Tuesday, October 11th, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. at Pitt Community College. If you have questions for the candidates, email them to us, admin@wbisawesomeradio.org or inbox on social media. Visit our website for more information. To volunteer for this event, contact us 252-756-3137. This is another Awesome Radio community event.
welcome back to Meet the Candidate. We are here today with Mr. Darren Jackson. He's running as a Democratic Party nominee for the NC Court of Appeals, Seat 11. I'm Renee Borston Hill, your host for this afternoon, and we're going to continue the questioning. Now, is there anything that you would like to tell this audience that we have not mentioned today? Tell us something about you that we don't necessarily know. Do you have a family? Do you have grandchildren, children?
Yeah, I do. So I am married. My wife Tina is originally from Pennsylvania. We met down here in Chapel Hill, and so we have 3 children. Our oldest, Alyssa, is a teacher in Wake County. She's a math and science middle school teacher. My son Logan works for a nonprofit in Durham. And then our youngest son, Jack, is a junior at Appalachian State in Boone. We have one grandchild, Ina, and she's about 20 months old now.
Okay.
So she keeps us busy. And yeah, I mean, I live beside my parents. I like to tell people I never went very far.
Okay.
and it was important to me that when I practiced law that I stayed close to home, that I wanted to practice in a small town. I had no interest really in moving to a different state. Luckily that the market here in North Carolina, we have a growing market so that, it wasn't too difficult to find a job as an attorney at the time I was looking. So, Eastern Wake. I used to tell people laugh that are not from around here, but I tell people I grew up in the rural part of Wake County, and people laugh. They say Wake County's not rural. Well, I can remember when they put the first stoplight in Nightdale. I can remember when they built the first Hardee's. And so, it's different than it was back when I was younger, but it's, still a lot of the great things I liked about living in a small town, I still enjoy.
Okay. And so, do you have any sports? Do you like to fish? Since you must be around lakes. I don't know what.
Yeah. Um, I like to run. I used to. Well, I shouldn't say run. I like to jog. I used to enjoy running a lot. Ran marathons. Lately, it's been a much slower pace of jogging.
Okay.
But I do like to get outside with our dog. We have a 8-year-old bulldog, Valley Bulldog, and we like to walk her. We've got some great parks and greenways in the area we live in. I love the beach, coast. I get down there as much as I can. Even this time of year. I mean, it doesn't have to be hot weather. I love to be down there in the fall and spring as well. Um, was really busy when my kids were younger playing sports. Coached a lot of sports teams. That is something I've not done for several years now since they outgrew that. My youngest son, when he got in high school, he gave up sports and focused on band.
Okay.
He's now gone back to playing lacrosse. He plays lacrosse at App State, and so my wife and I try to get up there a few weekends in the fall and the spring to watch and follow them around. But certainly can't make all the games like we used to when he was in high school. I used to like to read, but I do so much reading now. About the last thing I want to do when I get home and at the end of a long day is put on my reading glasses and read some more. So I don't do as much reading as I used to. But I do like to get outside as much as possible.
Okay. Well, Judge Darren Jackson, it's been really a pleasure. And I'm going to switch back and say maybe some people might have a question about this. What does it mean to assemble the record?
Yeah, so the record is it's a lot of different things. You know, I don't know. You can't. People on radio ain't gonna be able to see us, but it's all the filings. So in a criminal case, it would be like a copy of the warrant or the indictment. It would be the jury instructions the judge gave. It wouldn't be in the actual record, but it would be attached as an exhibit, the trial transcript. So when you go to court, in courts of record, somebody is typing up everything that's said in the courtroom. And so it's not the same as seeing it in person, of course, because you don't see facial expressions or body movements or tone of voice or anything, but you do read every word, what somebody said. Any pleadings in civil actions, there's a complaint, there's an answer. A lot of times there's a lot of discovery. I mean, it can really be, the record can be 50 or 60 pages in a smaller case, and it could be several hundred to thousands. I mean, you can imagine some of these large civil cases, medical malpractice, business cases, they'll have thousands and thousands of pages of discovery, and they'll put it all in the record and send it up.
Okay, so in all of the, I just want to also mention Judge Darren Jackson. You are the Democratic Party nominee for NC Court of Appeals seat 11. And I don't want the time to run out because we do know that early voting can determine an election. So we always encourage our listening audience that come October the 20th through November 5th, they can actually cast a ballot and also go and get the voting and not have to worry about the restrictions that maybe the November 8th day might put on you, knowing where you're supposed to go. So it's so important that we encourage everyone. And the reason why we also do these Meet the Candidates is that it gives our audience an opportunity to educate themselves, to say why they should vote for this candidate over another candidate, and also it gives them an opportunity. So we don't want the time to run out. There's a lot of, when just listening to what a court of appeals does, I don't know as a layperson if I would want that to be my job.
There's a lot of
discourage me, but
no, it's I enjoy the job a lot, but I love the law, And I always have loved reading and researching and writing. And so, and then of course we talked about earlier about the staff that I have working for me, but so I
Right.
get to be a mentor to them. And the nature of the law clerks are that they're usually only here a year or two. And so you have them constantly. So you're getting them fresh out of law school. You're their first mentor. You're hopefully getting them on the right path to being a very successful lawyer in their own right going forward. So, I love the job.
Okay. I don't know why I didn't choose this field, but but I
But
would say.
I love the job except for the campaigning. Campaigning across the state of North Carolina, you learn that it is a really big state.
Okay. Oh yes, I think someone said it's like 600 miles, all of going from one end of North Carolina to the other end. But I just think that it's good to know and to get as much information. Some people just think that you sit there and it's like a one, two, three, but it does entail a lot. And again, tell us why you're the right person and why you want to serve North Carolina, the Court of Appeals. Tell us why again you wanted to do this.
Yeah, I love the job. I love the law. Um, I think it's an important job, and that if we're going to talk about taking people's liberty from them, or taking people's children from them, or people's property, finding in disputes, or whether you're talking about state government firing someone or someone who got hurt on the job, whether or not they're going to get benefits or not. I think if you're going to do those things and allow the state to make those decisions, that it's important that the rules be followed, that the law be followed
Mhm.
and enforced. And so I like, I feel like that my experience of 25 years in the legal practice doing a variety of different things uniquely qualifies me to sit as a judge on the Court of Appeals and be able to pick up one case that has something to do with a criminal case and then pick up another case and a civil case and not miss a beat, because you're not allowed to specialize on the Court of Appeals. We don't send all our domestic cases to a particular set of judges or all our criminal cases to a particular set of judgments. It's random. You get three judges, and it's a random criteria. And so you get that judge whether that judge ever practiced criminal law or not. And so I think having the experience makes a big difference. And so I hope when people are deciding how to vote, that they'll look into the candidates, and then of course on mine, you have a record. You can go back and look at my rulings over the last 20 months. You can look at my endorsements and see that I'm endorsed from both sides. And I think that does say a lot about your ability to be fair and impartial when both the plaintiffs and the defendants think you do a good job.
Okay. So I'm just looking through my records here. What is a cross appeal?
A what?
A cross appeal?
Yeah, well, so either party can appeal, but sometimes in the trial court, the baby gets split in the middle, so to speak. So, you might have a plaintiff who sued a defendant, and the defendant countersued the plaintiff, and neither one of them got exactly what they wanted. So technically, they both have the right to appeal. So one of them will file appeal, and then the other one will file a cross appeal. And
Okay.
so it gets really complicated, because one of them will be the appellant on one issue, and the other one will be the appellant on the other issue, and then the appellee. And so we'll end up with multiple briefs from each side, one arguing, or basically saying, on the part I won, the trial court did that exactly right. But the part I lost, that was wrong. That judge made a mistake. I mean, that's really what they're saying. And so then we have to look at it all. And we might have a split decision like that. But so yeah, some of those cross appeals where people it didn't go all one way or all the other, they can get very complicated on appeal.
Okay. And once a decision is made by the appeals court, that's it. Can you re-appeal if a decision is made and you're still not satisfied? Is that
Right.
it, or can you come back again?
So it depends on what happens. So you can always appeal. So if if the three judges agree, and so it's a unanimous decision, and the loser doesn't like that, they can appeal to the North Carolina Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court can decide whether or not they want to hear the case or not. So originally, remember, when you appeal from trial court, the Court of Appeals has no discretion. We have to hear it. We have to take all appeals. If they're done properly, they followed the rules and everything, then we have to hear it. The Supreme Court, though, if you appeal from the Court of Appeals, if all three judges agree, they don't have to hear it. And the truth is, what they call discretionary review, which means they're going to review it in their discretion, is very little. It's a small percentage of the cases that get appealed to them. So the vast majority they turn away. However, in the Court of Appeals, if one judge disagrees with the other two and writes what's called a dissent, and there's a dissent in the case, then the loser can appeal to the Supreme Court, and they have to hear that case because there was a split among the judges. And so one of the important things that I think I do as a judge is I write dissents. I write a fair amount of dissents compared to my colleagues. And so when I disagree with the other judges, I put pen to paper and write why I think they're wrong and that I was right. And that does two things. It helps develop the law. It challenges the decision and sometimes they have to rework their majority opinion to make it stronger, to address the concerns that I've raised in my dissent. But it also gives the party a chance, if they lose, to then get that automatic appeal to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court has to hear it when one judge dissented from it. Truthfully, I had a case of a pretty big size one time that went through the Court of Appeals that I lost in the Court of Appeals. A judge wrote a dissent, and that gave my client the automatic right to appeal to North Carolina Supreme Court. We did that, and then all the judges on the Supreme Court agreed with us. So we won that case 7-0. But the only reason why we had that automatic appeal right was because a judge on the Court of Appeals took the time to write that dissent. And so I remember that. And so anytime I disagree, it's more work for me and my staff, but we take the time to write that dissent to give you that automatic appeal right.
Okay. All righty. So again, Judge Darren Jackson, we thank you so much for coming on Awesome Radio today. We do know, again, that early voting starts October the 20th. It ends on Saturday, November the 5th. This is a good way to get out there to cast your vote, to do the things that is your right to do. And that's to look at all the candidates that are on the ballot and make sure that you educate yourself, that you're making a good choice in terms of who you're casting your vote. And again, we're just going to continue just asking as the time goes, like for you to speak freely, okay, letting us know anything that you would like us to know. And just say, maybe this is a good way of so many people being able to know Judge Darren Jackson and how he is looking for you to cast a vote towards him. He's our Democratic Party nominee. He does have an opponent, and we're still waiting for him to see if he wants to come on Awesome Radio. And you are running for the Court of Appeals, seat 11.
That's right, seat 11. And Renee, thank you for having me. Like I told you before, it's a big state. And so, these are not high profile races where a lot of people know who's running and things. And hopefully most people don't have to go to court and they don't end up in the court system and they never really have to worry about it. But when you do, you're going to want someone who's fair and impartial. And so the opportunities like this give me a chance to introduce myself to voters. We are statewide elected, and so it doesn't matter what county you're listening from. If you're in North Carolina and are eligible to vote, you'll see my name under seat 11. And we, appreciate your consideration. If you're interested in finding out more about my campaign, you can go to our website, judgedarrenjackson.com. I'm on Facebook. I try to post things like links to this interview and things like that for people to consider. I post opinions that I write from time to time. Again, you can go to the North Carolina Administrative Office of the Court's website. You can look up opinions written by Judge Jackson if you're interested in that. But we really appreciate you having us on.
Okay, and then also, so what about, so are you out there, do you have people canvassing for you? Do you have phone banking, people doing phone banking, or?
So, it's being statewide and being, like I said, a low dollar campaign, it's really hard to do that. What we generally do is we have what's called a coordinated campaign with the Beasley for U.S. Senate race. And so we usually, if people want to volunteer and things, we refer them to the coordinated campaign, and their hand, when they're calling and handing out literature, they're doing it not only for Chief Justice Beasley and her Senate campaign, but they're also doing it for some of the judges and things like that. And so whatever people are encouraged, I know in some areas, some people can go door to door, and then you live out in an area like mine, there are not a lot of door to doors because it's a ways between doors. Knocking on one and knocking on another. And so, but you can sit from your house and you can phone call, and whether you live in a blue county or a blue county or a purple county, like I said, every vote counts the same for me running statewide. And so
Sure.
Whatever people can do to help people get out the word, posting this interview on your Facebook or retweeting it or telling your friends at church, whatever you can do, we really appreciate the opportunity, because I don't have the money to run those fancy television commercials.
I understand. I do know how it is to campaign and to just get your voice and your name out there. It's difficult, but the fact that you were appointed and now you're seeking the election, I'm sure that the listening audience, now that they get to see you, get to hear you, that they're definitely going to consider your campaign. What I would like to say also is God bless your campaign. We are a Christian radio station, and we do feel that one of our things that we like to do, again, is to educate our listeners when around this time when campaigns are so pressurized and so politicized that you lose sight maybe sometimes of what the candidate's real message is. So again, it's always good when they're able to hear directly from the candidate. And this will be available on our local TV. And again, we thank you so much, Judge.
Election Day is November 8th. Early voting begins October 20th. Do you know the candidates who are campaigning for our vote? Awesome Radio is hosting a nonpartisan candidate forum October 11th.